Hey guys, this is John. I'm back doing analysis for round 8 of the London Chess Classic FIDE Open. So I was coming off that loss to Grandmaster Benjamin Bach in the previous round, and even though I'm still having a good tournament, I knew that this game, round 8, was going to be pivotal if I still wanted to have chances for a Grandmaster norm. And I considered my position in the tournament to be basically a must-win, and for norm chances too. This was a game where victory was the only acceptable result, I believe. So I was going to push hard here as black. I knew my game would not be easy because this player, Piotr Nguyen, I had been kind of watching him throughout the tournament, and he's massively underrated at 23-29. He's been close to 2400 before, but then he told me he took a break from competitive chess, and he's only coming back now. But he has all three of his IM norms, and based on the way he plays, I would say he's probably more like 2450 strength. So you can easily tack on at least 100 points to his rating. So the game opened with d4, another d4 game. It's been basically a thematic tournament for me here in London with d4 as white and black. I played knight f6, and he played c4. Even though this is mainline d4 stuff, this was already a bit of a surprise because, according to my database, he plays the Trompowsky a lot, which is bishop g5 on move 2. Moreover, it was almost impossible to predict what he would play in general because already in this tournament he had played f4 on move 1, and I think he played c4 in one game. So he pretty much plays like every single opening. Looking at the database was pretty confusing because it seemed like he didn't give his opponents many second looks at a line. So even though I faced d4, c4 many times before, I just wasn't quite sure what to expect here. So after c4, I decided to go for a Benko gambit. So I played c5, he played d5, and I played b5, initiating the Benko gambit. I had another recent Benko gambit game at the UT Dallas Fall FIDE Open, and considering that this was a must-win situation for me, I thought this would be a good way to try to unbalance it. And I was also hoping that he hadn't spent a lot of time on this in his preparation, because previously in this tournament, after d4, I had just been playing d5 instead of knight f6 on move 1. But he came well prepared, and he played the opening quite quickly. So he took the pawn on b5. I played a6. He took. So just like my game with Chris Tulin at the UT Dallas Fall FIDE Open, I played g6. Black does not have to recover the pawn immediately, so g6 is just a good way to continue developing. Knight c3. And here, usually I play bishop takes a6, but lately Black has been trying to postpone the capture of that pawn even longer. And once again, I was trying to take my opponent out of his comfort zone a little bit. I've often found that with tricky and well-prepared players, it's good to strike first as far as prep goes and try to take them out of their book before they get a chance to show what they've cooked up for you. Tournament chess is very much a battle of preparation sometimes, and this game was no exception. So with bishop g7, Black is inviting White's next move, which is e4, and here I castled. This looks like total provocation because I am encouraging White's pawn to come forward once again with e5. But after knight e8, White would have to reckon with this pawn being weak and potentially overextended. And lately there's been some high-level games with this, including the game, I believe, Gelfand-Carlsen, or Carlsen-Gelfand. Can't remember who was playing White. So my opponent just developed here, knight f3. And now Black should play queen a5. This is the best move in this position, and if I'm going to play this line in aggressive fashion, I think this is the way to go. Now, to be totally honest, I was not sure if queen a5 was the best move. I kind of thought it was, but I didn't have any specific preparation here. I was just winging it. I never played this position before, and I just played a normal Benko move, which is d6, but in retrospect, this is a mistake, because after a few more moves, it becomes apparent that White has no particular problems in this version of the Benko. Queen a5 is much more dynamic because Black has the threat of knight takes e4. Whereas after d6, even though on bishop e2 I'll recover the pawn on a6, White hasn't had to go through some of the kingside troubles that they often have to in the Benko. If I can back up for a moment, one of the main lines, instead of this bishop g7 move, if I had captured on a6, a lot of times White will just play e4 here, as Chris Tulin did against me, and we'll get a trade, and here, if White wants to get their king to safety, they're going to have to spend a few more tempos, g3 and king g2. So it really should have dawned on me that I was just giving white a pretty easy version of a normal banko in doing this. But yeah, I think I kind of psyched myself out a little bit with the preparation. I was trying so hard to surprise him that in doing so, I wound up with a position that I should have recognized as a bad version of a normal banko. Because here white gets to castle comfortably. Now, it's not terrible for black yet, but I think white is better here. So I played queen b6. He played rook b1. This move is accurate. With queen b6, I'm pressuring the pawn on b2, and I'm trying to restrict the development of the dark square bishop for white. So rook b1 just overprotects that pawn, and white may be looking to develop this piece out to f4 and maybe support e5. That would be an ideal plan. Or he may play b3 and try to put the bishop on b2. So I played knight bd7. White went b3. And here I played queen to b4. I came to find out that this has all been played before in a game. I'm not sure queen b4 is the best move. It looks aggressive. I was trying to hit the knight and also attack e4. I knew this move was not going to win me material or anything, but I spent a lot of time thinking about what to do here. And eventually I said, all right, I'll just go with the aggressive move. But I think I should probably play something normal like rook fb8 and wait to play queen b4, because you'll see my queen just gets pushed back anyways. Here white took on a6, a good move. I took back. Unfortunately, I can't take on c3. Taking on c3 might be desirable because you figure the bishop is hanging and so is the pawn on e4 now that there's no white knight on c3 protecting it. But what would white have in reply to queen takes c3? If you want to pause your video and try to refute that move, you can do so now. All right, so the problem is bishop d2. This move just traps my queen on c3. There's nowhere safe for it to go. So that was a bummer, but I knew that I would have to take on a6, so I did. And now white played queen e2, developing the queen and hitting the rook on a6. The other game to reach this position went queen d3, which also makes a lot of sense, but I think Nguyen's move is even better, queen e2. I have a slight preference for this one. So I defended and doubled up the rooks, rook fa8. At first blush, black appears to have a normal banko position. In the banko gambit, you're often striving to play down the A and B files with your major pieces, and you have a coherent pawn structure, as I have here. But the issue is, it's going to be difficult for me to stop white's queenside pawns from advancing. And I achieve, or I stumble into, pretty much an ideal position for white in a few more moves. So white played bishop d2. Now that the rook on a6 is defended, white does have to address the loose knight on c3. So bishop d2. And I retreated my queen, queen b7. This move also burned a lot of time, because I kind of saw what was coming, but I just didn't have a good remedy to it at this point. Basically, I want to prevent white from playing pawn a4. If white can play a4 and then stick their knight on b5, black is going to be in trouble. But try as I might, and as many minutes as I burned on my clock here, I couldn't figure out a good way to discourage a4 or prevent a4. I thought about playing queen a3, so looking to physically stop the pawn from advancing. But the problem with this is that white plays knight b5, attacking my queen. And after queen takes a2, they have knight c7, forking these two rooks. So that would fail. I thought about rook a3 for quite a while, again, physically trying to block the pawn from moving up. But I just didn't think I had much here. I might have like a temporary blockade. I also had to work out some complicated lines with knight b5, because again, this move is dangerous. It hits my queen and hits the rook. Here I can play rook takes a2, but even this I was a little uncertain about, and there's also no reason for white to rush knight b5. Like, even an improving move like rook e1 is going to give black trouble here. So, at long last, I just decided to move the queen back and allow white to come forward on the queen side, which he quickly did. He played a4. So if you're a banko gambit player, you really have to avoid this scenario where white pushes the a pawn and then quickly establishes a knight on b5, because that's going to block your play down the a and b files, and I knew I was in some trouble already. So I played knight e8, uncovering my bishop. The idea of this move is that after white plays knight b5, which he did, I can play knight c7 and at least try to challenge this dominant knight. I also had some ideas about playing b5 and maybe trying to weaken their pawn structure, but in the present position, it's not going to work out. So knight e8, just a purely defensive maneuver, preparing to exchange the knights. And the knights did get swapped, so knight takes c7, queen takes c7. Here white played a good move, rook off c1. Now, I'm down a lot of time. I know my position is not good. I'm starting to have a really bad feeling about this game. And here, to make matters worse, I blundered. So I played the move rook to b6. And this is a significant error. Now, if you'd like to pause your video and figure out how white can punish rook b6, you can do so now. All right, so with rook b6, I was trying to pressure b3, and I knew that my rooks would be redundant on the a file now. It doesn't make sense to have these pieces pointed at a protected pawn, so I'm trying to reposition and go after that pawn on b3. The issue is that white's pawns can come forward very quickly. So Nguyen played a5, attacking my rook. I moved the rook back, and now he played b4. Very strong. And I'm not sure how I missed this, because what could be more natural than pushing the pawns with tempo, trying to exploit white's extra pawn on this wing. And now I saw that I was in big trouble, because I can't take my queen on c7 would be hanging, nor can I push the pawn. Meanwhile, if black just does something, white will play b5, and they're going to have two intimidating connected pass pawns on my 5th rank. So things are getting quite desperate for me. So I played queen d8. I was hoping he might exchange on c5, although it was a faint hope. After that, I'm still down a pawn, but at least this a pawn doesn't have a buddy right next to it, a b pawn, that can help it advance, and maybe I can go and try to win this pawn eventually. But white played the best move, b5. Now, if you're black here, I think you basically only have one chance, and that's to try to give a little bit of material to slow down these pawns. Because if black tries to, get my pieces out of the way of these advancing pawns, it's going to be too much. I've just gifted white 2 connected passers, and I can't continue without eliminating one of them. So the exchange sacrifice, rook takes a5, is forced here. He took, and I took. So black is down in exchange, and for those of you who don't know what that means having lost a rook for a minor piece. Often you'll hear of the exchange sacrifice, which can be a tactical device or a positional device. But here I was just forced to give up a rook for a pawn and a minor piece because those pawns were looking too strong. White should win this position. I mean, with the extra material and the way the game has gone so far, it's hard to believe that white's not significantly better. But I do have some trumps here. I do have a dominant dark square bishop. It's got this great diagonal to work with, and I'm controlling the a1 square. I have some pressure on b5, even though white has it guarded with his queen and his rook right now. I have a structure that's nice and compact. So I knew that all hope was not yet lost, but I figured with good play, white would be victorious here. But it's important to have kind of a guerrilla warfare mindset at this point. When you can objectively say that your position is losing, but the position is not yet completely clear, that means you have chances to get back in the game and try to complicate and make your opponent's task as difficult as possible. So that's what I mean by guerrilla warfare. I'm going to kind of duck and dodge and create annoying threats, refuse to exchange pieces. Basically, I'm going to put myself in white's shoes and ask myself what would be most annoying for me as white to face in converting this position to a win. And those are the moves I want to play as black. Got to go down swinging if you're going to go down. So white played rook c2. A good move. He introduces the idea of rook a2 attacking my queen. I played knight b6. During the game, I had the feeling he should just continue with rook a2 here and attack that queen. I was going to come into c3, but I'm not actually convinced that the queen is all that well placed on c3. But instead, he played knight to d2. So he starts maneuvering his knight. This plan also makes sense because if he could play knight c4 and swap off my knight, then he's one step closer on the path to victory. Now here I think I played a good practical move, and he praised this move in the postmortem. I think if I don't play this move, my position is pretty bad. So I'll give this to you guys as a quiz. Black to move. Try to find a good practical resource for black that potentially gives white problems. And you can pause your video if you like. Okay, so I played the move bishop to c3. So bringing the bishop in, I'm not so much hoping to eliminate the knight, but what I want to do is put the bishop on b4 in many cases. So let's say white just continues on their merry way with knight c4. I would swap the knight, and then after queen takes, I can play bishop b4. And in doing so, I block white's rook on the b file, and I'm going to win this b5 pawn. And provided I win that pawn, like let's say rook a2, queen takes b5, queen takes b5, rook takes b5. Now I have a bishop and pawn for the exchange. This is still an uphill battle for black, but it's better than what we just had a couple moves ago. So, in my opinion, bishop c3 is the only real way I can cause him any trouble here. Also, if he plays knight b3 in response to this move, attacking my queen, I can come into b4, holding the bishop. And I do create a mini pin here, and maybe I can include my knight as well, knight a4 coming up. So after bishop c3, he started playing on the opposite wing. He recognized that I don't really have a threat here because I'm not sure I want to play bishop b4 voluntarily. I'd probably only do that as a reaction to white playing knight c4 and swapping the knights. Otherwise, I think it's good to keep my bishop on this diagonal. So for that reason, Nguyen decided to start probing me on the king side. So he played pawn g4, just staking out space over there. Now such moves are pretty annoying to face when you're in time pressure. We've got 14 moves to go before the time control, and I was under 10 minutes, whereas he had maybe 30. Actually, I was probably even lower than that. I probably had something like 5 minutes left. Yeah, my time management was not great in this game. So he's just kind of saying, I recognize that you as black don't really have much here, and that you're just going to react to what I'm doing, so I'm just going to grab some space and force you to make a decision. So I tried to do the same. I just tried to maintain the tension and improve my position a bit on the king side. So I played king g7. He went king g2. I played h6. He played h4. And now I dropped my bishop back to f6. Was not quite sure if I should push anything further on the king side. Like if I play g5, then this pawn could just be a target on this square. Like say take, and I'd always have to reckon with queen e3 in the future. So I wasn't completely comfortable with the tension, and I didn't want to have to think about my bishop maybe even be undefended or loose on c3. So I figured white has put their pawn on h4 now. This might be a good reason to come back and attack it. White played f4, and he's thrown all 4 of his pawns at me now on the king side. H, G, F, and E. So this was rather intimidating. And now I have to think about threats like e5. He's actually letting me have the h-pawn right now. He's not defending the h-pawn. Because if I go take it, my bishop has been deflected from this great diagonal. So I can't recall exactly what I thought he would do. Maybe just knight c4 in the case that I take. But I figured this would be very bad because I've gone out of my way to just win a lowly pawn. And he's probably going to get rook a2 in and start attacking me and using that b pawn. So bishop takes h4 wasn't appealing. So I played queen a4 instead, inching closer with the queen and attacking that rook. He went knight f3, so now his queen and his knight, or his queen and his rook coordinate. I played rook a8. With knight f3, he's also introducing rook a2, reintroducing this threat. So rook a8 is important to deny him that. Now, one thing I had to work out before playing rook a8 in the limited time I had here is what happens if white plays e5, trying to trap my bishop on f6. What do you think would be the continuation if e5 is played? You can pause your video if you like. All right, so on e5, it's important that black can play d takes e5, f takes e5, and now queen takes g4 check. So my queen sitting on a4 has some nice ideas laterally if white gets too aggressive with their pawns. And then after white moves their king, I can take on h4, and the position is totally unclear. This is not what white wants. They don't want their king side to just collapse like this. So I knew that with my queen on a4, I was indirectly preventing that e5 move for now. So instead, Piotr decided to play g5. So attacking with the g-pawn instead. I played bishop d4. Taking looks more natural, but I was a little concerned that if I open the h-file, he may switch his rook over to h1 and potentially double and try to mate me down there. So I tried to keep things closed by playing bishop to d4. Now he played rook d1, putting more pressure on my bishop. His rook isn't doing a whole heck of a lot on b1. It is helping to defend b5, but so is his queen. So I think playing rook d1 and attacking the bishop makes sense. Now, I wasn't thrilled about allowing the exchange of the bishop, but I couldn't bring myself to play something like bishop a1. That looked too extreme. So instead I played queen b3, trying to take advantage of white's absent rook from the b file, and also looking to play rook a3 and counterattack along the third rank if I could. He took on d4 with the knight. I recaptured. And now white played a good move. And after he played this move, I had a feeling like I was really going down. I've been worse for quite a while, but I think this move kind of demonstrates that white has everything under control. Just when black is getting a glimmer of counterplay with rook a3, which I would certainly do if he took the pawn on d4. He doesn't want to mess around with this, because then queen h3 or queen g3 could be a big threat. So instead, white played queen to d3, blocking the third rank and offering a timely queen trade, which unfortunately for me I have to accept, because otherwise it's going to take my pawn on d4 next move with check. So I begrudgingly brought my rook in. If he takes on d4 now, though, I could just sidestep with my king, and even though I lose the knight, once again white has issues because I'm going to come over here and check. Not exactly sure what the best check is. Probably all of them are good, but let's just say queen f3, for instance, and then I can go win his rook on the next move, or maybe even play for checkmate. So if I'm going to trade queens, at least I can kind of do it on my own terms by playing rook a3. He took. I took back. He took on d4. So now I'm down a exchange plus a pawn, and some pieces have been exchanged. I knew that this position had to be losing. I mean, you can't be down that much material with nothing to show for it. But I also thought maybe I could put up a little bit of a defense here, and we're still a few moves away from time control, so I was kind of just blitzing out my moves. So I took on g5. Black's best chance to try to draw this position is to swap off as many of white's pawns as possible. That was just my loose goal, because if I can trade all the pawns, then this probably is unlikely to happen, but we would get down to king and two rooks versus king, rook, and knight, and I can draw that. Remember I said that. Hint, hint. So yeah, h takes g5, and he just took back. Now, one thing I have to realize here is that white's going to go rook c7 on the next move when he gets a chance, and attack this pawn. And I thought it would be really bad if, after rook c7, I would have to play king f8. So I really didn't like my king being on the back rank there, and if ever he can introduce his other rook to go check this king, from, let's say even a square like h8, maybe he goes like this and like this and like that, I think that's pretty bad, and probably I'll lose the e-pawn eventually. So here I played f6, which I think is probably the best chance, even though this is still losing. And at least trying to get my king a bit closer and swap another pair of pawns. So he played rook c7. I gave a check on b2. Wasn't sure if I should check or not. I had to play quickly because I had hardly any time. I just wanted to see where his king goes as well. He played king f3. I played king f7 to guard the pawn. He took on f6, and I have to take with the king. So mission accomplished, at least for now. I swapped another pair of pawns off. I do have a weak g-pawn, but I wasn't... I thought there might be a slight chance of saving the position here. Now, we've made time control, so this is move 41. And immediately, white plays a good move, I think. He plays rook d3, stopping any checks on the third rank. I took the pawn on b5. I've been postponing this decision, rook takes b5, but it's high time to take the pawn. Technically, this move may not be good, but black has little else. Now, I think white has a pretty straightforward win here. And if you'd like to calculate it, it's not too long of a variation. You can do so now. So, white to move, what is the best way for white to win? Okay, so there's a few ways to do this. You could even choose a slow plan, like trying to bring this rook to an attacking position and maybe go after e7. But white can play e5 check. And then after I take the pawn, he has this nice move, pawn to d6, which, simply put, is winning. There's nothing I can do to save the game here. d6 is killer because if I take the pawn, which is 2 squares away from queening, mind you, if I take, he takes with his rook, check, king f5, and rook f7 is checkmate. So on d6, my options would be few and far between and all bad. If I play e4 check, I'm just delaying the inevitable. He takes with his king. Again, I can't take the pawn because I get checkmated. Rook takes d6. If I try to push the pawn past, he's just going to push d7, and this is going to cost me a knight, which is definitely losing. I'll just be down a rook thereafter. So d6 would have been a killer blow, and based on how confidently he played e5 check, I was positive he was going to play d6. But to my surprise, he did not. He actually took on e5. Shocking. And I was just sitting there thinking like, wow, I might have a new lease on life after this move. Because now I've traded another pair of pawns. Yes, he gets to take e7 with check. But now, conceivably, all I have to do to save the draw is win this d5 pawn. Because I knew if I could get down to king, rook, and knight against king and 2 rooks, that should be a draw. If you simplify it even further, king and rook versus king and knight is definitely a draw, provided the king and knight don't get too discombobulated. So now black's main goal is just to win that d5 pawn. That's pretty much the only thing I have to focus on. So after rook takes e7, I played king d6, attacking the rook. He went rook e6 check, king d7. So if white were to just go take g6 now, then mission accomplished. I can take on d5. And he doesn't have time to take my knight because I'm on his rook on d3. So here, white played king to e4. Now we have a critical position. I felt that my next move was going to be basically deciding whether I drew this game or not. I felt like a draw was in reach, but I had to be accurate here. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure my next move even holds the draw, but it's definitely the best way of playing for black. So if you'd like to pause your video and try to figure out what black should do, you could do so now. Okay, so there's at least one trap to avoid. Taking on d5, well, I don't even know if this constitutes a trap, but taking the pawn, hoping to take the rook on e6 after he takes back, makes sense, but unfortunately on rook takes d5, white can just play rook takes b6, grab the knight, and then we lose. So black must play rook b4 check. And now here, if you spotted my tactical idea, then good job to you. If white blocks on d4 with his rook, we have the gorgeous move knight takes d5. Now knight takes d5 is working because we're pinning white along the 4th rank. And he can't take d5 with his rook. So if he were to take with his king, then we get to take here. King takes, and we have a draw. Somehow black came up a pawn out of all this, although the position is still drawn. So that's a cute little idea, and that's one of the reasons why rook b4 check is working, because rook d4 can be met by this knight takes d5 resource. So after rook b4, white plays king e5. Oh, and by the way, there was a false path I should mention. The move knight a4 instead of rook b4 check is very tempting. And it took me a minute or two to see knight a4, and I got really excited when I did, because I thought this move was the answer for a while. Knight a4 is strong because, or it looks strong because we're threatening knight c5, and white has one too many pieces in forking distance. Unfortunately, I found a flaw with knight a4. Even though black will win back the exchange, this is still losing because of, let's say, king e5, knight c5, forking the two rooks, rook d6 check, king e7, and now rook h3. This is the line I calculated. I can play knight d7 check and force white to part with the rook, but after king takes d7, rook h7, black's king will be forced to the back rank, and white is so well placed in this king and rook and pawn endgame, they're going to be victorious. Like let's say I play king d8, hoping to keep my king in front of the pawn. White can just play king e6, and my rook is in a very awkward spot too. You usually don't want to rely on side checks if you're not on the so-called long side. So here, like playing rook b6 check would just do nothing because white pushes the pawn and rook h8 is coming. So after king e6, my king is just going to be forced out from in front of the pawn because, let's just say I go away with my rook somewhere. He's going to go check, king here, check, and he's going to push on through real quick. Like king c6, rook check, here, d7, and it's all over, red rover. This pawn is going to promote. So that was incredibly disappointing, seeing that I had this resource, knight a4, but that it just didn't work. You know, I've been down in exchange for the past many moves, and now I have a golden opportunity to win it back, but I can't go for it because I saw that this king, rook, and pawn versus king, rook, and pawn ending was hopeless. And to make it doubly frustrating, I was pretty certain that he missed knight a4. I just kind of had the feeling he was drifting over the past few moves, and when I mentioned knight a4 in the analysis, he was completely surprised, like he didn't see that at all. But I think these are the type of moments and decisions that define you as a chess player. Like if you can refrain from playing a very tempting looking move because you've assessed the position soberly and you recognize that even though it's kind of a cool move and maybe your opponent has even missed it, objectively it's not good. So you can't play it. So instead I played that rook b4 check move, and we already established that rook d4 does not work for him, so he played the only other move, king e5. If he moves his king back, like king e3 or something, I can take on d5 with check. And once again, I'm undefending his rook, so I can take it next move and draw the game. So king e5. Here I gave another check, knight c4. He plays king f6. And here I went right back to the b6 square, so knight b6. And after I played knight b6, I thought that I was pretty much drawing. I didn't see a lot of ways for white to try to save this pawn, because again, that's just my entire goal, just eliminate that d pawn. I don't care about my g pawn at all. White can have that. Turns out, when I put the computer on this later, the computer says that rook d1 is a potentially good move for white, which I think is a very tough move to find. And I haven't looked at this position long enough to appreciate why rook d1 is so strong, but I think white is basically playing for zugzwang. I can't take on d5 here because that would just blunder the knight, of course. So if black plays, like, say, rook b5, looking to attack the pawn, I believe, what's the idea here? It's not d6, because if d6, I think there's this check, forcing the king away from the rook. So it was something else, maybe rook e5? I'm not quite sure. Although on rook e5, always the king will come up here. So I will have to go back and double check this line, but just for the record, the engine was saying that rook d1 was the best chance for white right here. Instead, he just gobbled the pawn on g6, and he played this move pretty quick. But after rook b5, I'm going to win this pawn back. Rook b5 is accurate. Note that it was still possible for me to go wrong. If knight takes d5 is played, hoping for that same tactic on the rook, I would lose after rook e5. And I can't defend this knight. It's just a goner. But rook b5, on the other hand, is accurate because we're just waiting another move and we're going to win this pawn next. He can't push the pawn because the rook on e6 just falls. Also, if he plays rook to e5, we can bring our king up to d6, and now the king attacks the rook and also joins in the attack on d5. So I thought king takes g6 forfeited any chance for him to win by keeping that pawn. So he played king f6 here. I took the pawn on d5 with my rook. I was not at all opposed to going into a king and knight versus king and rook position because I just knew that to be drawn. That's one of those endings that you may have in your own games, so it is good to know that a king and a rook cannot beat a king and a knight unless the king is like stuck in the corner or the knight gets disconnected from the king, which can happen sometimes if you're not careful. So I would have been happy if he had played rook takes d5 here and swapped down to that. He played a little trickier. He played rook b3. I moved my knight. He gives a check. Still looks a little scary. I mean, white is up material, and now our king is getting forced to the back rank. But fortunately, I have everything under control here. He went rook c6. And now I get to swap with rook d6. Take and take. Attacking his rook on b7. He went away with his rook h7. I gave a check. I mean, optically, this looks dangerous, right? Because I have only 2 remaining pieces, and they're both on the back rank. And white has a king and rook. I mean, I was still sweating a little bit, even though I was like 99% sure this position was drawn. I never had this endgame before in a tournament game, but of course I've seen king and rook versus king and knight before. But you just hope that you don't make a mistake, like at the end of a long game, and spoiling a draw here after I had to scratch and claw to get back in the game, and my opponent missed that earlier win would have been. It'd be really nice to get the draw, but a loss would be tragic for me at this point. So I'm just going to keep my king and my knight tight together. I'm going to check the white king. And if I can't check, I'm just going to keep my knight close to the king. Just basically never separate them. So here he played king c6. I played knight f6, hitting his rook on h7. He went rook f7. So here would be a mistake to play knight e4 and send the knight too far away. Sometimes that doesn't lose, but you really don't want to have to calculate whether the knight can make it back to the safety of the king's protection. So just keep those pieces right next to each other. So knight e8. He gave a check on d7. I played king c8. He went rook over to a7. And we're on move 61 here. Time-wise, we were both getting pretty low in the second time control. But with the 30-second increment and the fact that the position has been vastly simplified, time isn't really a factor. So after rook a7, he's threatening mate on a8. So I can just run here. And you can kind of see like why white fails to win this endgame. It's the fact that the knight controls some key squares, like especially d6. So when I play king d8, his king can't follow me to kind of create a mating threat once again. He's just always denied that square. And if he checks me right now on a8, I'm going to slip out to e7. And if that king makes it to the center of the board away from the back rank, it's an even easier draw. So white's only chance really is to try to make something happen right here with my king stuck on the back rank. But as I've described, it's a draw. So he went back, rook d7, repeating the position. King c8. He played his rook up the b file. I just went knight c7. Played rook over to a4. So definitely don't move the rook or the knight now if you're black, right? Because if we go back to e8, we're just going to get checkmated, rook a8. But I can move the king instead. So king d8. And my knight controls the a8 square, so he can't come in there with his rook. He played rook a3, just waiting. I played knight right back to e8. Now I'm going to slip out through this square if I'm able. So he brings the rook into a7. And, you know, again, hoping for a slip. I could blunder the game away with king c8 and just get mated. But I can also play knight f6, which is what I did. And this is about as far away as the king and knight really have to get. He went rook over here. Knight back to e8. Rook d7 check. And here, I claimed a draw by 3 position repetition. We've had this position 3 times now. And what you want to do in these situations, this is like the FIDE rule. If you suspect the position is about to be repeated 3 times, so in other words, with my next move, king c8, I could bring about the same position 3 times in a row. Actually, I think technically with rook d7, it's already 3 positions. But if you're going to claim a draw, which I definitely wanted to do because I have no chances to win, what you do is you write the move on your score sheet that you intend to play. So for me, I wrote move 68, king c8, and then you don't play the move. It's very important that you do not play the move. So I wrote down king c8, and then I informed my opponent. I just said to him, I'm going to claim a draw by 3 position repetition, and I paused the clock. And he just agreed right away. He glanced at his score sheet, and I think he quickly realized that the position had been repeated 3 times. But had he not done that, I would have just got up and, now that the clock is paused, go and just grab the arbiter's attention, and they would come over, check the score sheets, and just confirm that the position had been repeated 3 times. So that's the proper way to do it. I mention this because I know there's a lot of tournament players out there. The rules that you're playing by may vary, but it's safest if you do not actually play the move. Because if you quickly play king c8 and then look up at your opponent and say draw, well, they might play a different move and say no, I don't want to draw. I don't know. He could play away somewhere and say, where's your 3 position repetition now? So by not playing the move, you keep the ball in your court and you don't allow them to make a quick response, basically. So that concluded this pretty eventful game. I was thrilled to have made a draw because when you're losing that bad, your opponent has such a clear win. A half point seems so far away. And this was a key moment right here. Right after he played e5 check and I took the pawn, d6 was just killer, and I would have been resigning in a matter of moves. I probably would have made a move or two just to see if he blunders, but that was just over right away. But instead he took the pawn on e5, and I managed to eventually win the d5 pawn. I do think I could have played this opening much better. I took a risk by playing the Benko Gambit, but once again, I was in sort of a must-win position as far as the norm goes, so I wanted to try to take a risk for victory. But yeah, if you're going to play into this line, after knight f3, you definitely got to play queen a5. That's the most important move here. Playing d6 as I did doesn't bother white. White just gets to complete their development, and black's looking at an inferior version of a Benko. So final thing I wanted to say is, unfortunately, because of this game, I did not have any GM norm chances. So a win in this game would have put me in a decent position to make a norm. But with a draw, my GM norm trek for this tournament was effectively over, which is kind of too bad, but life goes on. I'll keep trying still. That loss to Benjamin Bach in the previous round, round 7, really hurt me. Losing with white was pretty bad there as far as my norm chances go. But overall, I didn't feel too bad. I know this player is very strong. Like I said, I think he'll be well over 2,400 soon. And aside from the way I played the opening and this rook b6 move, I wasn't all that unhappy about this game. I thought I actually put up a decent fight with limited time in this exchange down position. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this one. And the final round, round 9, is coming up tomorrow. So stay tuned for analysis of that one. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.